I sat in the kitchen at the old oak table I had inherited from my mother, sorting through my bills. The receipts for electricity, gas, and water lay in neat piles next to a cup of cold coffee. Everything had been paid on time, as always. At 70, I couldn't afford to be careless with money. My elementary school teacher's pension required careful planning of every dollar, especially now that a significant portion of my income went to helping my grandson. Casper had always been my favorite, although I never showed it openly. His parents, my son Walter and daughter-in-law Priscilla, were always too busy with their own lives to give the boy enough attention. I remember how, during his school years, Casper would come to me to do his homework. We would sit in the kitchen at the old oak table I had inherited from my mother. I made him peanut butter and jelly sandwiches while he pored over his math textbooks. A skinny boy with unruly reddish hair and freckles on his nose, he often got frustrated with his poor grades, but I patiently explained the problems to him over and over again. I remember how he would furrow his brow as he tried to understand fractions, how he would chew on his pencil as he pondered algebra problems. "Grandma Millie, you're better than all the teachers," he would say, and my heart would fill with such warmth that I wanted to hug the whole world. In those days, I was still working at an elementary school on the other side of town. 42 years of teaching is a lifetime spent among children's voices, chalk-covered blackboards, and stacks of notebooks to grade. I loved my job, but more than anything else, I loved those evenings when Casper sat next to me and we did his homework together. He was a smart kid, but he lacked confidence. His parents rarely praised him, always finding something that could be improved. The years flew by. Casper went to college, majoring in management, and I helped him pay for his tuition. It's not that I had a lot of money. A primary school teacher's pension doesn't make you rich, but I always knew how to save and put money aside. My late husband Harold worked at the post office, and we were both modest people, used to living within our means. After his death, I inherited the house. The mortgage had been paid off during his lifetime, and I could afford to help my grandson get an education. I remember the day Casper came to me with his college documents and a calculator in his hands. He was calculating the cost of tuition, dormitory, textbooks, and the amount was impressive. His parents could only pay part of the expenses. They had their own financial obligations, plans to renovate their house, and a vacation in Europe. Casper looked confused and said he would find a job and take out a loan, but I could see how worried he was. I didn't want my grandson to start his adult life with debts and constant worries about money. We sat in the living room, and I looked through his documents. Casper was nervous, fiddling with the edges of the papers, trying not to show how much he needed my help. At that moment, I made a decision that seemed natural to me, to give him money for his education. Not a loan, not a credit, but a gift. I remember how he thanked me and promised to pay me back every penny when he found a good job. I just smiled and said that education is an investment in the future, and I am glad that I can make it. 4 years in college flew by unnoticed. Casper came home for vacations and talked about his classes, classmates, and plans for the future. He had changed. He had become more confident, more mature, more serious. His reddish hair had darkened, his freckles had almost disappeared, and instead of a skinny teenager, I saw a handsome young man with a firm handshake and a direct gaze. I was proud of him and of the fact that I had been able to help him become who he was. Casper's first job at an insurance company didn't pay very well, but he tried hard. Being a novice sales agent is hard work, full of rejections and disappointments, but my grandson didn't give up. He rented a small apartment on the outskirts of the city and drove a used car that we chose together at the car market. I remember that day. We spent 3 whole hours looking at different options, checking engines, and haggling with sellers. Casper wanted something sporty and bright, while I insisted on reliability and economy. In the end, we chose a compromise, a blue sedan with low mileage and a good reputation. I was proud of him in those years. He didn't ask for money and tried to manage on his own. True, sometimes I still helped him when the car broke down or he needed to pay for dental treatment. What can you do? A grandson is a grandson. But he always tried to pay back his debts, coming to me with small amounts and apologies for not being able to pay everything back at once. I liked his sense of responsibility, his desire to be independent. Everything changed when he met Evelyn. She was a tall blonde with delicate features and the manners of a true lady. At the time, she worked at an elite beauty salon in the city center, specializing in facials and skincare consultations. But she carried herself as if she were the heir to $1 million fortune. She had long manicured nails, always impeccable makeup, and a wardrobe that clearly cost more than she could afford on a cosmetologist's salary. Casper brought her to my place for lunch 2 months after they met. I prepared my signature roast chicken with mashed potatoes and green beans, a simple, hearty meal that my grandson had loved since childhood. Evelyn ate very little, constantly apologizing for watching her figure, and looked around my house with interest. She was particularly attracted to the antiques, the silver service I had inherited from my grandmother, the paintings in heavy frames, the antique clock on the mantelpiece. Casper was head over heels in love, and it was obvious to anyone who saw them. He never took his eyes off her, anticipated her every wish, and laughed at all her jokes. Evelyn was nice, but a bit reserved, as if she was assessing the situation and making conclusions. I tried to accept his choice. After all, he was a grown man, 30 years old at the time, and he had the right to decide for himself who to build his life with. They dated for the next year and a half, and I gradually got used to Evelyn. She visited me, always bringing flowers or a box of chocolates, complimenting my home and my cooking. True, the compliments sounded somewhat mechanical, as if she were repeating a memorized text, but I tried not to pay attention to that. The main thing was that Casper was happy. The wedding was set for spring. From the very beginning, Evelyn declared that she wanted a real dream wedding and not a modest ceremony. She insisted that the celebration be held at a country club rather than a regular restaurant. We had to order fresh flowers, a professional photographer, musicians, a fancy dress, and suits for the groom and groomsmen. The expenses turned out to be 3 times higher than the initial budget, and the young couple turned to me for help. Casper came to my house in the middle of winter, looking worried and confused. We sat in the kitchen, drinking tea and eating cookies, and he explained the situation. Evelyn wanted a wedding that cost more than he earned in 6 months. He had already taken out a loan, but it wasn't enough. Had he asked his parents? Yes, but they could only give him a small amount. A wedding day should be remembered as the happiest day of your life, so I gave them a significant amount from my savings. I remember how Casper cried when I said I would give them the money. He promised to pay back every cent and swore that this was the last time he would ask me for help. When Evelyn found out about my decision, she came to see me the next day with a huge bouquet of roses, hugged me, and called me the dearest grandmother in the world. At that moment, it seemed to me that I was helping to create a strong family, investing in the happiness of the only person close to me. The wedding was truly beautiful. A country club located on the shore of a small lake. White tents, fresh flowers everywhere, an exquisite menu, and professional music. Evelyn looked like a princess in a lush white dress sprinkled with pearls, and Casper couldn't hide his pride and happiness. All the guests said it was the most beautiful wedding they had ever seen. I also felt proud, although I realized that I had spent almost a quarter of my savings on this day. But the real spending began later. The young family first rented an apartment in a decent neighborhood. Evelyn said she couldn't live in the slums where Casper had rented before the wedding. The rent cost them half of their family budget, but they managed. Casper got a promotion and became a senior agent, and his salary increased slightly. Evelyn also worked, although she complained that the salon's clients were becoming more and more demanding and that management did not appreciate her professionalism. A year later, they decided that renting an apartment was a waste of money and that they deserved their own home. Not just any house, but a mansion in the prestigious Colonial Heights neighborhood, with 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bathrooms, a large kitchen, and an open concept living room. The house was built just 5 years ago, had a modern layout, a smart home system, and a well-kept yard with automatic irrigation. The price was astronomical for their income. By that time, Casper had received another promotion and become a middle manager, but his salary was only enough to cover a third of the mortgage payment. Evelyn had quit the salon by then, saying that the job was beneath her and that she planned to find something more suitable. While she was looking, she decided to focus on home improvement and personal development. That's when they came to me for help. It was a warm summer evening, and we sat in my garden, drinking lemonade and discussing their plans. Casper looked confused and asked for advice. He showed me photos of the house, told me about its advantages, and explained that it was a profitable investment. Evelyn added that they needed space for future children, that renting was a waste of money, and that all their friends had already bought their own homes. I thought about it for a long time, weighing the pros and cons. On the one hand, the amount was very large, almost half of my remaining savings. On the other hand, he is my grandson, the only person close to me, and if I don't help him now, when he is starting a family, who will? I was 70 years old, living alone in a house that was too big for me, with money sitting in the bank earning a small amount of interest. Maybe it would be better to spend it on my grandson's happiness. We agreed that I would pay a certain amount towards the mortgage each month. Not the entire payment, of course, but enough to make the house affordable for their family budget. Casper was so grateful that he even cried. He hugged me and promised that he would never forget my kindness. Evelyn also looked very pleased, although she did not show her emotions so openly. It has been 3 years since then. Every month, I faithfully transferred money to their bank account, sometimes adding a little extra for unexpected expenses. When the roof leaked, I helped with the repairs. When they needed new furniture for the living room, I paid half the cost. When they decided to go on vacation to the Bahamas, I gave them money for the trip. I visited them every weekend, brought homemade baked goods and gifts, and cooked lunch on Sundays. It seemed that we had developed a warm family relationship and that my investment in their happiness was paying off. Casper always greeted me with a smile, asked about my health, and told me about his work. Evelyn was also nice, showing me new purchases for the house and sharing her plans for renovations. Tonight's dinner was supposed to be special. They invited me to celebrate the third anniversary of buying their house. We hadn't seen each other much lately. They were busy with their own stuff, and I didn't want to impose, so I was really happy about the invitation to the fancy dinner. I bought a bottle of good red wine and a beautiful bouquet of white orchids, which Evelyn loved so much. In my purse was a small gift, gold cufflinks for Casper with his initials, which I had picked out at a jewelry store last week. The salesman said they were Italian-made, very high quality, and elegant. Leaving the house, I got into my trusty Honda Civic. I had changed cars 2 years ago, choosing something more economical and practical. The old car could still serve me well, but I decided it would be better to sell it while it was still worth a decent amount of money. I needed to spend my money wisely, especially considering my ongoing expenses for helping my grandson. On the way to their house, I thought about how nice it is to have a family, people who need you and appreciate your support. At 70, it is especially important to feel needed, useful, and loved. Many of my peers complain about loneliness, about their children growing up, and forgetting about their parents. For me, it's different. I have Casper, family dinners, and shared plans. Casper and Evelyn's house was really beautiful. It was a two-story red brick building with white columns at the entrance and large windows that sparkled in the rays of the setting sun. There was a neat lawn and flower beds, which Evelyn carefully maintained in perfect condition. The driveway was paved with natural stone, and the front door was decorated with carved elements and a wreath of artificial flowers. Every time I came here, I had mixed feelings. On the one hand, I felt proud. It was partly my doing. On the other hand, I felt a slight sadness. My own home was much more modest, and sometimes it seemed to me that I lived worse than those I was helping. But I pushed such thoughts away. The main thing is family, love, mutual support. Parking in my usual spot next to the rose bed, I took the gifts and headed for the front door. The evening promised to be pleasant. The weather was warm, the sun was shining, and I was in a great mood. I pressed the doorbell, which played a melodic classical tune, and heard Casper's familiar footsteps in the hallway. The door opened, and Casper smiled at me with the same smile I remembered from his childhood. Tall, slim, wearing a white shirt and dark trousers, he looked like a successful and confident man. Only something strange flashed in his eyes, as if he was assessing me with his gaze, noting every wrinkle, every sign of age. "Grandma Millie, I'm so glad you came," he said, hugging me rather formally. His hugs used to be warmer, more sincere. Now it seemed like he was fulfilling a duty rather than expressing his joy at seeing me. "What beautiful flowers," he continued, accepting the bouquet of orchids. "Evelyn will be delighted. She was just saying today that the house needed something elegant." We walked into a spacious entrance hall with marble floors and high ceilings. To the right was the living room, to the left was the study, and straight ahead was the staircase to the second floor. The house was tastefully furnished, but rather cold. Lots of glass, metal, and white. Not at all like the cozy interiors I preferred. "Evelyn is finishing up in the kitchen," Casper explained, leading me into the living room. "She's been cooking something special all day. You know how she likes everything to be perfect." The living room smelled of expensive candles and air freshener. Glossy magazines about interior design and lifestyle were displayed on the coffee table. The sofas were snow white, without a single stain, and modern paintings hung on the walls, which seemed to me to be meaningless splashes of paint. "Have a seat, Grandma," said Casper, pointing to one of the armchairs. "Would you like some water? Or maybe something stronger? We have some good wine." I was slightly offended that he called me Granny instead of the usual Grandma Millie. It sounded somewhat dismissive, although perhaps I was just being overly sensitive about trivial matters. "Water will be fine," I replied, settling into the chair. The soft upholstery was comfortable, but the chair was too low for my age. It would be difficult to get up from it. From the kitchen came the sounds of cooking and Evelyn's voice humming something to herself. Casper brought me a glass of cold water with a slice of lemon and ice cubes. "How are you, Grandma? How's your health? I hope you drive carefully at your age," he asked, sitting down opposite me. There was something patronizing in his tone, as if he were talking to a small child. "My health is fine," I replied a little more sharply than I had intended. "And so is my driving. I'm not so old that I'm a danger on the road." Casper laughed, but it sounded insincere. "Sure, sure. We're just worried about you. You know, at 70, your reflexes aren't what they were at 50. I wanted to argue, but at that moment Evelyn entered the living room. She was wearing an elegant black dress that accentuated her slender figure, and her light hair was styled in an exquisite hairstyle. A pearl necklace I had given her for her last birthday sparkled around her neck. "Mildred, dear," she exclaimed, approaching me with open arms. "How wonderful that you were able to come. You look fresh for your age." The compliment sounded ambiguous. Fresh for your age is not the same as simply looking good. But Evelyn smiled so sweetly that I decided not to dwell on the unfortunate wording. Thank you, dear, I replied, accepting her kiss on the cheek. You look impeccable, as always. That dress suits you very well. Oh, it's an old thing. Evelyn waved her hand dismissively, although I was sure I had seen the same dress in an expensive boutique on the main street and remembered its price. Casper, did you offer Grandma something to drink? She asked for water, Casper replied. Apparently, at her age, it's better to avoid alcohol. I didn't ask her to avoid alcohol. I just said that water would be enough for now. But they had already made their conclusions about my age restrictions. Of course, Evelyn agreed. At our age, we can afford a glass of wine, but older people really should be more careful. I was 70, not 90, and I had always been in good health, but they talked about me as if I were a frail old woman who could barely stand on her own 2 feet. Dinner is almost ready, Evelyn announced. I made your favorite dish, Mildred. Remember how you told me about that old roast recipe your mother taught you? I decided to try to recreate it, although, of course, I adapted it to modern tastes. I had never told her any of my mother's roast recipes. My mother cooked completely different dishes, and I remember that very well. But Evelyn spoke with such confidence that I began to wonder, what if I had indeed forgotten a conversation? That's very sweet of you, I said cautiously, although I don't really remember telling you. Oh, but of course you did, Evelyn interrupted me with a sweet smile. It was a few months ago. You probably just forgot. At your age, it's normal. Your memory isn't as sharp anymore. Casper nodded in support of his wife. Yes, Grandma, you definitely told us. I remember you saying that you cooked much better when you were younger than you do now. I didn't say that either. On the contrary, my cooking skills have only improved with age. I had more time to experiment and learn new recipes, but they insisted on the contrary with such confidence that I began to doubt my own memory. Maybe you're right, I agreed uncertainly. Sometimes it's really hard to remember all the conversations. Of course, dear, Evelyn smiled indulgently. That's perfectly normal. My grandfather started forgetting things at your age, too. First little things, then something more serious. The comparison with Evelyn's grandfather, who, as far as I remembered from her stories, suffered from serious memory problems, seemed offensive to me, but she said it in such a gentle tone that it was awkward to argue. Let's go to the table, Casper suggested, getting up from his seat. Evelyn has been preparing for this dinner all day. She even bought special candles to create a festive atmosphere. The dining room was furnished in the same modern style as the rest of the house. A large glass table, designer chairs, abstract paintings on the walls. The table was set with tall white candles, expensive tableware, and crystal glasses. Everything looked very elegant but cold. Evelyn helped me sit down at the table, gently supporting my elbow. Be careful, dear. These chairs are quite high, and I wouldn't want you to fall. I didn't need help to sit down on a normal chair. My legs were strong enough, and my coordination was fine. But Evelyn acted as if she were helping a disabled person. Thank you, I said dryly, settling into my seat. Casper opened a bottle of red wine and poured himself and Evelyn a glass. He didn't offer me anything, apparently deciding that I was too old for alcohol. What about me? I asked, pointing to my empty glass. Oh, you said you only wanted water, Casper said, surprised. We thought it would be better for you not to mix drinks. I can drink a glass of wine to your health, I insisted. One glass won't hurt. Casper reluctantly poured me a small amount of wine, about a quarter of a glass. Let's start with that amount. Let's see how you feel. I was furious. They were talking to me like a child who needed to be told how many sweets she could eat. But I held back, not wanting to ruin the evening with an argument. Evelyn brought the main course from the kitchen, some kind of elaborate roast with an unusual sauce and a side dish of exotic vegetables. It was nothing like the simple home cooking my mother used to make, but Evelyn presented it as a recreation of a family recipe. Try it, Mildred, she suggested, putting a small portion on my plate. I hope the taste reminds you of your youth, although, of course, your taste buds are not as sensitive as they used to be. The remark about taste buds sounded like another hint about my old age. I tried the roast. It was delicious, but completely unlike anything my family had ever cooked. Very unusual, I commented cautiously. Yes, I added some Asian spices, Evelyn explained proudly. Modern cuisine requires a more sophisticated approach than the simple dishes our grandmothers used to cook. Another hint about how outdated my preferences were. They systematically made it clear to me that I belonged to a past generation that did not understand modern trends. At our age, we can still afford to experiment with food, added Casper, but older people often have to stick to a simpler diet. My stomach can handle any food just fine, I objected. Of course, dear, Evelyn agreed condescendingly. But still, at your age, it's better to be careful. Your digestion isn't what it used to be when you were young. They continued to eat and chat peacefully among themselves, periodically making comments about my age and the limitations that come with it. Each phrase was polite and seemingly caring, but together they created an unpleasant feeling that I was considered frail and helpless. By the way, Grandma, said Casper, cutting the meat, we were thinking maybe you should consider moving into a retirement home. Not right away, of course, but in the future. Your house is too big for one person, and it's hard to take care of it at your age. The suggestion came as a bolt from the blue. A nursing home? I was completely independent, did a great job of running the household, drove a car, and led an active lifestyle. Why would I need a nursing home? I asked, trying to remain calm. I'm doing just fine on my own. Right now, yes, Evelyn agreed. But you have to think about the future. What if you fall and break your hip? Or forget to turn off the gas? In a specialized facility, professionals will look after you. I've never forgotten to turn off the gas, I protested. Not yet, Casper corrected me. But age takes its toll. It's better to be safe than sorry. The atmosphere at the table was becoming increasingly tense. I was beginning to realize that this dinner wasn't just to celebrate the anniversary of buying the house. They had some kind of goal, some kind of plan for my future. Besides, Evelyn continued, selling your house will give you a nice sum of money. You'll be able to live comfortably in a good retirement home. So it wasn't just about my comfort, but also about the money from selling the house. I was beginning to understand the true motives behind their concern for my well-being. I tried to change the subject by telling them about my recent activities. Last week, I signed up for computer literacy courses at the local library and was quite successful in learning new programs. I thought this was a good example of how active my life was, but their reaction was completely unexpected. Computer classes? Casper and Evelyn exchanged glances, and I saw poorly concealed amusement in their eyes. That's so sweet, Grandma. You're trying to keep up with the times. Trying? I asked. I'm quite successfully learning new technologies. Evelyn giggled, covering her mouth with a napkin. Sorry, dear, but that's really touching. I can just imagine you sitting at the computer trying to figure out all those buttons. They're not buttons, they're programs, I corrected her, a little more sharply than I meant to. And I'm doing pretty well. The teacher even praised my work. Sure, sure, Casper agreed, but there was a patronizing tone in his voice. Teachers always encourage older students. It's part of their job to boost their confidence. So my success wasn't real, but the result of leniency toward my age. I felt irritation rising inside me, but I tried to keep my composure. "What are you studying there?" Evelyn asked in the same patronizing tone. "How to turn on a computer. How to use a mouse. We're learning how to work with documents, email, and search for information on the internet," I explained. "Next week, we'll be learning about social media." This caused them to burst out laughing. Casper laughed so hard he almost choked on his wine, and Evelyn covered her face with her hands, trying to stifle her laughter. "Grandma on social media," Casper gasped when he could speak again. "That's fantastic. Can you imagine, Evelyn? She'll be posting selfies and liking things." "Stop, I can't," Evelyn giggled. "And she'll probably write comments with mistakes and funny abbreviations, like all old people on the internet." Their laughter was offensive and humiliating. They were talking about me in the third person, as if I wasn't there, discussing my supposed failures as if they were some kind of amusing spectacle. "I'm sitting right here," I said coldly, "and I don't see anything funny about people my age learning new technology." "Oh, we didn't mean to offend you," Evelyn said quickly, but the laughter still lingered in her voice. "It's just so unusual. For our generation, it all seems natural, but for you, the older generation, it's a real feat." "A feat?" I repeated. "Learning how to use email is a feat?" "Well, for people your age, definitely," agreed Casper. "Your brains aren't as flexible when it comes to taking in new information. It's a scientifically proven fact." They continued eating, occasionally exchanging meaningful glances and barely suppressing their laughter. I tried to tell them about a book I had recently read, an interesting historical novel about the war, but that attempt was also unsuccessful. "A historical novel?" Evelyn asked. "Oh, that's so typical of your generation. You always live in the past, not the present." "The book was written this year," I objected, "and it won several literary awards." "Yes, but the events in it take place in the past," explained Casper. "You older people always long for the time when you were young. It's psychologically understandable." "I read all kinds of literature," I tried to defend myself, "and contemporary literature too." "Of course, dear." Evelyn nodded condescendingly. "But you have to admit that books about the old days are closer to you. It's easier for you to understand the world you lived in." They began discussing the literary tastes of older people again, their habit of idealizing the past, and their inability to understand contemporary culture. They were talking about me, but again in the third person, as if I were the subject of study rather than a participant in the conversation. "Do you remember how she talked about her neighbor last time?" Evelyn asked her husband. "How that old lady complains about modern youth and says that everything was better in the past." "Yes, that's a classic," Casper agreed. "All old people are the same. They constantly grumble about young people and reminisce about the golden days of their youth." I hadn't told them any stories about a neighbor who complains about young people. In fact, my neighbor, Mrs. Chandler, was a very modern woman who got along great with her grandchildren and never criticized the younger generation. But Casper and Evelyn had created their own image of a typical elderly woman and attributed the characteristics of that stereotype to me. "I never told you about a complaining neighbor," I interrupted their conversation. "Yes, you did." Evelyn waved her hand dismissively. "Maybe not verbatim, but that was the gist of it. You often talk about how everything has changed for the worse." "That's not true," I protested. "I never said that everything has changed for the worse." "Grandma, you just don't remember," Casper said gently. "At your age, your memory is selective. You forget what you said, but you remember the distant past well." They began discussing the peculiarities of elderly people's memory again, their tendency to embellish memories and forget recent events. Casper even gave the example of his colleague, whose grandfather, in the early stages of dementia, told the same stories over and over, not remembering that he had already told them before. This is a completely normal part of aging, he explained to Evelyn, as if giving a lecture. First, short-term memory suffers, then long-term memory. That's why older people repeat themselves so often. Yes, and they become so touchy, Evelyn added. They think everyone is deliberately ignoring or offending them, when in fact the problem lies in their perception. I sat at the table and listened to them discuss my supposed age-related changes. According to them, I was a forgetful, past-living, touchy old woman who didn't understand the modern world and kept repeating the same stories. Can we talk about something else? I asked, trying to maintain my dignity. Of course, dear, Evelyn agreed. What would you like to talk about? Your health? The medications you're taking? Again, topics related to age and its problems. They couldn't imagine that I had interests unrelated to old age. How are you doing? I asked. Casper, how's work? Evelyn, have you found a new place? Everything's great, replied Casper. Work is going well. We're planning to expand the house, add a terrace, and renovate the kitchen. Yes, we've already received an estimate from the contractor, added Evelyn. Of course it will cost a lot, but the house is worth it. They began discussing renovation plans, the cost of materials, and the choice of contractors. They talked among themselves, only occasionally glancing in my direction. I felt like I was an unwelcome guest at their private meeting. The terrace will open onto the backyard, Casper explained to his wife. We can have barbecues and entertain friends there. Of course, it's not a place for older people. There are steps and uneven surfaces. But it's perfect for our lifestyle, agreed Evelyn. We're young and active, and we have lots of friends. The contrast between their youth and activity and my old age was becoming increasingly clear. It was as if they were deliberately emphasizing the difference between us, showing that they belonged to a different generation, a different world. What do you think of our plans, Grandma? Casper suddenly asked, turning to me. Sounds interesting, I replied cautiously, not understanding what he expected from me. Really? Evelyn perked up. We thought people of your generation were conservative and didn't understand modern design trends. Why do you think that? I asked in surprise. I've always been interested in design and architecture. Yes, but your generation is used to more traditional solutions, Casper explained. You like lace curtains, floral wallpaper, heavy furniture. He was describing an interior that my grandmother might like, but not me. My house was furnished simply and tastefully, without excessive pretentiousness, but they apparently imagined all older people living in a museum of the past century. My house is quite modern, I objected. Modern for your age, Evelyn corrected. But objectively, it looks quite old-fashioned. No offense. The offense was taken, and it was quite painful. They criticized my taste, my home, my lifestyle, covering their insults with polite reservations and references to age-related characteristics. Dinner was coming to an end, but the atmosphere was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Every word they uttered contained a veiled or overt reference to my old age, my inadequacy, my backwardness in modern life. They laughed at my attempts to tell them something interesting, interrupted me, and discussed my words among themselves as amusing examples of elderly behavior. Gradually, the truth began to dawn on me. To them, I was not a beloved grandmother or a close relative, but a source of entertainment. My naivety, my attempts to be modern, my stories, all of this was a comedy show to them. They enjoyed feeling smarter, more modern, and more successful than me. By dessert, the atmosphere had reached a boiling point. Evelyn brought out some kind of fancy cake with exotic fruits, but even that became an excuse for more barbs. I hope it's not too sweet for you, she said, cutting me a tiny piece. At your age, you need to watch your blood sugar. Diabetes is a very common problem among older people. I don't have diabetes, I replied wearily, and my test results are fine. Not yet, Casper corrected me, but prevention never hurts. Actually, Grandma, we've been wanting to talk to you about your health for a while. He took his smartphone out of his pocket and started scrolling through some notes. We've been looking at the statistics, and it turns out that at your age, it's very important to get regular checkups. When was the last time you saw a cardiologist or a neurologist? I see my therapist regularly, I said, and I feel great. A therapist is good, but it's not enough, Evelyn interjected. You need specialists. We've made a list of doctors you should see. She handed me a piece of paper with a printed list: cardiologist, neurologist, endocrinologist, orthopedist, ophthalmologist. There were more than 10 specialists. It was as if I were a seriously ill person in need of comprehensive treatment. That's very kind of you, I said, putting the list aside. But I think my doctor knows better what tests I need. Your doctor is old school, Casper objected. He's not familiar with modern methods of diagnosing age-related changes. We've researched this on the internet and read specialized websites. So, an hour of reading on the internet made them more competent than a doctor with 30 years of experience. The logic was striking. Besides, Evelyn continued, we found a great nursing home. Not now, of course, but for future planning. Would you like to see some photos? She didn't wait for my answer and took out her phone again. Pictures of a modern building with well-kept grounds appeared on the screen. Look how comfortable it is, she said admiringly, scrolling through the photos. Medical staff around the clock, entertainment programs, dietary meals, and most importantly, you won't be alone. There are old ladies like you living there, added Casper. You'll have something to talk about medicines, about illnesses, about how bad the younger generation has become. They laughed, imagining me sitting in a circle of frail old women complaining about the modern world. For them, it was a funny picture, worthy of ridicule. The only problem is the cost, Casper continued, becoming more serious. These places aren't cheap. You'll have to sell your house and use the money to pay for it. What if the money from selling the house isn't enough? I asked, even though I already knew the answer. Well, then you'll have to find something simpler. Evelyn shrugged casually. There are state institutions. Of course, the conditions there are not as comfortable, but for people without means, it's the only option. They discussed my future as an inevitable fact. Not if I become infirm, but when. Not, I may need help, but I will definitely need to go to a nursing home. They weren't interested in my opinion on the matter. By the way, Casper said suddenly, putting down his fork, we wanted to discuss another issue with you, a financial one. The tone of his voice changed. Even the semblance of concern disappeared, leaving only a businesslike tone. You see, our expenses have increased, he continued. The job requires more entertainment expenses, the house needs improvements, and your help remains at the same level. What do you mean? I didn't understand. It means we need more money, Evelyn said bluntly. We've calculated that if you increase your monthly transfers by 30%, it will cover our additional needs. 30% was a significant amount, almost a third of my pension. With such expenses, I would have to seriously cut back on my own budget. That's quite a large amount, I said cautiously. I need to think about it. Think about it? Casper was surprised. What is there to think about? We are your family, the only people close to you. Who else are you going to spend your money on? No one, of course, I agreed. But I have expenses too. What expenses? Evelyn snorted. You live alone in a huge house. You don't go anywhere. You don't meet anyone. What do you spend your money on? It turned out that my modest lifestyle was an argument against my right to spend my own money as I saw fit. Since I didn't have an active social life, I should give all my money to them. Besides, added Casper, you're going to leave us an inheritance anyway, So, what difference does it make if we get the money now or after you die? The phrase hit me like a punch in the gut. He spoke of my death as if it were imminent and even desirable. The inheritance was a more pressing issue for him than my current well being. Besides, Evelyn agreed with her husband, you're already quite old. 70 is a serious age. Statistically, women live to be 80, which means you have about 10 years left. 15 at most. They discussed the length of my life with a calculator in their hands, calculating the benefits of receiving their inheritance early. To them, I was not a living person, but a source of money with a limited shelf life. You can think of it as an investment in your own old age, Casper continued to persuade me. The better we set ourselves up now, the more opportunities we'll have to help you later. When you become completely helpless, we'll take care of you, Evelyn promised. We'll find a good nursing home and visit you, but for that, we need to have the means. The circle was complete. In order for them to take care of me in my old age, I had to give them all my money now. And they were going to take care of me by putting me in a nursing home and visiting me occasionally. Think logically, Grandma, Casper said patronizingly. You're old, lonely, and soon you'll be infirm. We'll get your money anyway. Why not do it now, when we really need it? Yes, and then you'll have peace of mind, agreed Evelyn. You won't have to think about wills, inheritance, all those legal complications. Give us the money now, and you won't have to worry about it. They tag-teamed me, using logic, emotions, even threats. My old age, loneliness, impending infirmity, all were arguments in favor of my giving them my savings. And honestly, added Casper, pouring himself more wine, we're tired of asking. Every time we have to explain why we need the money, persuade, thank them. It's humiliating for grown adults. Humiliating? I asked. Asking for money? Not asking, but receiving what we are entitled to, Evelyn corrected. We are your only family. If not us, then who will take care of you in your old age? No one, Casper replied bluntly. You have no other children, grandchildren, or close friends, only us, and we demand fair treatment. The word demand sounded particularly harsh. No more requests, thanks, explanations, only demands and threats. To be honest, Grandma, we're pretty tired of you, Evelyn said suddenly, discarding the last remnants of politeness. You constantly come here with advice, tell boring stories, meddle in our affairs, and you give us less money than we spend on your visits. Less than you spend on my visits? I was taken aback. Well, yes, explained Casper. Every time we have to buy special food that you can chew, cook simple meals instead of what we like. We have to clean the whole house so you don't find something to complain about. Plus the emotional toll, added Evelyn. We have to smile all day, keep up with your old people's topics of conversation, and put up with your health complaints. They turned my visits into a list of expenses and inconveniences. Every word I said, every request I made, every show of concern was perceived as a burden. To be honest, we've already discussed the possibility of reducing these visits, Casper continued. Maybe seeing each other once a month, or on holidays. It would be fairer for everyone. Yes, and you can transfer the money automatically, his wife agreed. Then you won't have to come every time and listen to our explanations of what we're spending it on. The perfect plan. I disappear from their lives, but the money keeps coming. No obligations, no gratitude, no communication. Just regular transfers from a lonely old woman to a young, successful couple. Think of it as a gift to yourself, Evelyn said with a fake smile. You'll be free from having to keep track of our lives, and we'll be free from having to entertain an elderly relative. It'll be better for everyone. At that moment, something inside me finally broke, not from pain or resentment, but from a clear understanding of the situation. I was not a grandmother to them, not a loved one, not even a friend. I was a source of money to whom they had to pay minimal attention in order to maintain the appearance of family relations. All these years, all my sacrifices, all my transfers, nothing created real closeness. They tolerated me for money, smiled for money, invited me to visit for money. And now, when they thought they had finally tamed me, they dropped their masks and showed their true feelings. I slowly got up from the table. Casper and Evelyn looked at me in surprise. "Where are you going?" asked my grandson. "We haven't finished our conversation yet." I didn't answer. I walked into the hallway, grabbed my purse, and headed for the door. "Grandma, are you offended?" I heard Evelyn's voice. "We were just being honest about our relationship." "Wait, let's discuss this like adults," Casper called out. But I had already opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The warm evening air felt like a breath of freedom after the stifling atmosphere of their home. "Mildred, don't be childish," came from behind me. "We're discussing important matters." I got into the car and started the engine. In the rearview mirror, I could see Casper and Evelyn standing in the doorway, looking at each other in confusion. Apparently, they hadn't expected such a reaction to their honesty. As I drove away, I didn't look back once. The beautiful house for which I had been paying extra for 3 years was left behind. For the first time in a long time, I felt free. At home, I sat in the living room for a long time without turning on the lights. Soft moonlight streamed through the windows, illuminating familiar objects: my late husband's old armchair, the bookshelf with volumes I had collected over the years, family photos on the mantelpiece. All of this seemed especially dear to me after the evening I had experienced. My house was not as big and luxurious as Casper and Evelyn's mansion. It was a modest 2-story building with wood siding, a small porch, and a garden that I kept in order myself. But it had something their perfect interior lacked: warmth, history, real life. Every item in this house had its own story. The oak table where Harold and I had dinner for 43 years. The rocking chair where I rocked little Casper when his parents were busy. The piano that my son and then my grandson once played. All these items held memories of real family relationships, of love and care that money couldn't buy. I recalled today's dinner, every word, every glance, every laugh. How long had they been planning this conversation? When exactly did they realize that they could talk to me as an annoying supplicant rather than as a loved one? Perhaps they had always felt this way about me, but had simply been better at hiding it before. I felt ashamed of my own naivety. All these years, I sincerely believed that I was helping my beloved grandson build a family, that I was investing in our shared future. I was proud of their successes, happy for their happiness, and considered their home partly my achievement. But they saw me only as a source of money, an inconvenient obligation from which they needed to get the maximum benefit with the minimum expenditure of time and attention. It was especially painful to think about Casper. I raised this boy as my own son, investing not only money, but also my soul in him. I helped him with his homework, took him to the doctor when his parents were away, bought him birthday presents, and supported him in difficult times. I thought that we had developed a real closeness and mutual affection, but today I saw not love in his eyes, but calculation. He valued me as an asset that needed to be used as effectively as possible. My old age was not a reason for him to care, but an argument for increasing his financial demands. My loneliness was not a reason to visit more often, but a justification for the need to give all my money to them. Evelyn was more honest in her cynicism. She never pretended to have warm feelings toward me. Her politeness was always formal, her smiles forced, her interest in my life superficial. But I took it as a character trait, a certain coldness of temperament. I didn't think that behind the outward decorum lay outright contempt. Now, many episodes from past years took on new meaning. Their unwillingness to spend holidays with me, their references to being busy when I suggested joint trips, the haste with which they ended our phone conversations. I attributed it to youth, to other interests, to the natural busyness of a young family, but they simply did not want to spend time on me that did not bring them material benefits. Gradually, not only disappointment, but also anger grew in me. I had a right to be angry. For 3 years, I gave them a significant portion of my pension and saved on myself so that they could live in a beautiful house. I gave up trips I could have afforded, shopping, and small pleasures to maintain their standard of living. And in return, I received contempt, ridicule, and demands to give even more. They talked about fairness, about the fact that they would inherit the money anyway. But fairness worked both ways. If I was their only relative, then they were my only loved ones. I had the right to expect respect, care, and human warmth. Instead, I got a list of doctors to visit and brochures for nursing homes. Around midnight, I went upstairs to my bedroom. While changing, I caught my reflection in the mirror. A 70-year-old woman, gray-haired, wrinkled, but still strong and healthy. Yes, I was not young, but I was not the decrepit wreck they described. I had strength, plans, desires. I could drive, cook, read, learn new things. My life was far from over. I spent the night awake, thinking about the situation from all angles. By morning, I had made a firm decision. If they saw me only as a source of money, then it was time to shut off that source. If my company was a burden to them, then it was time to relieve them of that unpleasant responsibility. I got up early, even though I had only slept for a few hours. The first thing I did was make a strong cup of coffee and sit down at the kitchen table with my phone and bank documents. Outside the window was a gray, rainy day that perfectly matched my mood. At 9 in the morning, as soon as the bank opened, I dialed a familiar number. I had been using the same branch for many years and knew almost all the employees by name. "Good morning, Mrs. Claiborne," said Susan, the manager who handled my accounts. "How can I help you?" "Good morning, Susan. I need to cancel an automatic transfer," I said calmly. "Of course. Can you give me the transaction number or the recipient's name?" I gave her Casper's details and the amount of the monthly transfer. Susan quickly found the information she needed in the system. "I see. A regular transfer for mortgage payments. Would you like to change the amount or frequency?" "I want to cancel it completely," I replied firmly. There was a short pause on the line. Apparently, Susan hadn't expected this decision. She knew that this transfer had been in place for 3 years. "Are you sure, Mrs. Claiborne? It's a fairly large amount, and the transaction has been performed regularly for a long time." "Absolutely sure," I confirmed. "And I want the cancellation to take effect immediately. The next transfer, scheduled for the 15th, should not be made." "I understand. I need to ask a standard question. Is this decision voluntary? No one is forcing you to cancel the transfer?" The question was appropriate. Many elderly people were victims of financial manipulation, and banks tried to protect their customers. "It's my own decision," I replied, "completely voluntary and well thought out." "Okay, then I'll need your verbal confirmation and a code word to verify your identity." I gave the code word and dictated the wording of my consent to cancel the transaction. Susan made the changes in the system, and a few minutes later, the automatic transfer was canceled. "All done, Mrs. Claiborne. The automatic transfer has been canceled as of today. Would you like to receive written confirmation by mail?" "Yes, please send it," I agreed. "One more question. When will the recipient find out that the transfer has not been received?" Banks usually notify about unpaid payments on the second or third day after the due date. That is, if the payment was due on the 15th, the notification will arrive on the 17th or 18th. "Thank you. That's all I needed to know." After hanging up, I felt a strange lightness. It was as if a huge burden that I had been carrying for the last 3 years had been lifted from my shoulders. I no longer had to check every month to see if the transfer had gone through, if there was enough money in the account, or if the amount had been calculated correctly. I got up from the table and walked over to the window. The rain was getting heavier, but it didn't seem like a dark omen to me. On the contrary, it was as if nature was washing away old sorrows, cleansing the atmosphere for new beginnings. A few days of silence awaited me before Casper and Evelyn found out about my decision. I didn't plan to call them and explain my actions. Let them find out from the bank, like all the other debtors who didn't make their payments on time. There was something liberating about this thought. For 3 years, I had been not a grandmother to them, but a sponsor. Now let them feel what it means to lose a sponsor and be left alone with their financial obligations. I spent the rest of the day in pleasant idleness, reading, cooking, listening to music. For the first time in a long time, I didn't think about other people's problems, didn't worry about other people's needs, didn't plan how to help someone else. I just lived for myself, enjoying my own home, my own time, my own desires. In the evening, as I was going to bed, I realized that today was the first day of my new life, a life without obligations to ungrateful relatives, without the constant feeling of guilt for not helping enough, without the need to justify my right to spend my own money on myself. Tomorrow would be a new day, and I would meet it as a free woman. The next 4 days passed in surprising calm for me. I didn't expect any phone calls, didn't plan any explanations, just enjoyed the silence. I read a book on the history of England that I had wanted to read for a long time, but had kept putting off. I tidied up my home library, sorting through old photos and letters. I cooked the dishes I loved, not the ones my guests liked. On Wednesday morning, I went to the garden center and bought the rose seedlings I had been dreaming of for several months. I used to deny myself such purchases, saving every dollar for my monthly transfer to Casper. Now I could afford small pleasures without feeling guilty. An elderly salesman helped me choose the right varieties and explained the finer points of planting. We talked for almost an hour, discussing rose care, the best places for flower beds, and pest control. Simple human conversation without hidden motives or ulterior motives seemed unusually pleasant to me. At home, I enjoyed digging in the ground, planting new bushes. Physical work in the fresh air always calmed me down and helped me organize my thoughts. My neighbor, Mrs. Chandler, peeked over the fence to look at my work, and we had a nice chat about gardening and the weather. No one called me grandma, hinted at age restrictions, or advised me to be careful with the shovel. On Thursday, I signed up for Spanish classes at a local college. I had long dreamed of learning a second language, but there were always more urgent expenses. Now I had both the time and the money for self-improvement. The teacher, a young woman named Carmen, treated me with respect and enthusiasm, without making any concessions for my age. Friday began with a phone call. Around 10 in the morning, the home phone rang, and I saw Casper's number on the display. My heart skipped a beat, but I answered the phone in a calm voice. Hello? Grandma, finally. My grandson's excited voice rang out on the other end of the line. We've been trying to reach you for 2 days. Where have you been? That wasn't true. I hadn't left the house in the last 2 days, and the phone hadn't rung. But I didn't point out the contradiction. I was at home, I replied calmly. What's the matter, Casper? What's the matter? His voice rose. We have a serious problem. The bank sent a notice about a late mortgage payment. They say the transfer didn't go through. Did you forget to pay? He spoke in a tone as if I were a scatterbrained old woman who had forgotten to pay her utility bill. I didn't forget, I replied. I canceled the automatic transfer. There was a pause on the line. Apparently, Casper wasn't expecting that answer. You canceled it? What do you mean you canceled it? Why? Because I'm not going to pay your mortgage anymore, I explained in a calm voice. You won't pay? He asked, puzzled. Is this some kind of joke? No joke. I've decided to stop financial support. Another pause. Then I heard muffled voices. Casper was apparently explaining the situation to Evelyn. Grandma, are you upset about our last conversation? He asked in a different tone, softer and more ingratiating. We didn't mean to hurt your feelings. We were just being honest about our needs. You were indeed being honest, I agreed. And I'm being honest too. I'm not going to finance your lifestyle anymore. But we're family, Casper exclaimed. You can't just abandon us like that. It was funny to hear about family from a man who, a few days ago, had suggested reducing our meetings and switching to a purely financial relationship. Family implies mutual respect, I replied, and there was no respect in your words. Evelyn approached the phone. I heard her take the receiver from her husband. Mildred, hello, she said in a voice that was meant to sound friendly, but came out false. What nonsense are you talking about? Of course we respect you. Your respect was expressed by calling me a burden and discussing my impending death as a source of inheritance, I reminded them. That's not what we meant, Evelyn said quickly. You misunderstood us. We were just planning for the future, thinking about practical things. I understood you perfectly, I replied, and my answer remains the same. Look for other sources of funding. But we don't have any other sources. Evelyn's voice was becoming hysterical. You know our situation. Without your help, we won't be able to pay for the house. That's your problem, not mine, I said, surprised at my own calmness. You're adults. Deal with your own obligations. Casper took the phone again. Now there was a threatening tone in his voice. Grandma, do you understand what you're doing? We could lose our house. The bank could start foreclosure proceedings. Then you should have thought about that earlier, I replied, before insulting the only person who was helping you. We didn't insult you, he protested. We just expressed our opinion. Your opinion was that I'm an old, useless burden who should give you all my money and disappear, I summarized. Well, I'll partially fulfill your wishes. I'll disappear from your life. Don't be childish, Casper snapped. You're acting like a capricious old woman. The words, capricious old woman, finally convinced me that I had made the right decision. Even now, when they needed my help, they couldn't resist insulting me. Perhaps, I agreed calmly, but this capricious old woman will no longer pay for your whims. Okay, Evelyn said quickly, picking up the phone again. Let's not argue. Come over and we'll discuss everything calmly. I'll make your favorite dish. She still thought she could buy me off with a nice dinner and feigned concern. You don't know my favorite dish, I said, and I'm not coming. I don't need humiliation disguised as a family dinner. Mildred, be reasonable, she began in a different tone. Think about your old age. Who will take care of you if not us? I'll take care of myself, I replied, just like I did for 70 years before I met you. You can't live alone forever, Evelyn exclaimed. Sooner or later you'll need help. When I need it, I'll turn to professionals, I said. At least they won't insult me while providing their services. Casper took the phone again. Now he was trying to play on my emotions. Grandma, I'm your grandson, the only person close to you. We've had a special relationship since childhood. We did, I agreed, until you turned that relationship into a financial transaction. But I love you, he almost shouted. I always have. We just found ourselves in a difficult situation, so we didn't speak very delicately. Love is not expressed in demands for more financial support and plans to put me in a nursing home, I replied. That's an expression of greed. Okay, he said after a pause. Forget our last conversation. We were wrong. We apologize. Let's go back to how things were. Things can't go back to how they were, I said. You showed your true colors. Now I know what you really think of me. We think you're a wonderful grandmother, Casper hastened to assure me. The best. We're ready to see you more often, spend more time together. For my money, I added, you're willing to put up with me for money. Not for money, because we love you. But the words sounded false, desperate, like a plea for mercy. There wasn't an ounce of sincerity in them. Casper, I said wearily, stop lying. To yourself and to me. You need money, not me. Look for money somewhere else. But where? He almost howled. We don't have any other relatives with money. My parents give what they can, but it's not enough. You could sell the house and buy something more modest, I suggested, or find an extra job, or ask Evelyn to get a job. Sell the house? Evelyn, who had been listening to the conversation, gasped. Are you crazy? It's our home. We've put so much into it. You invested my money, I corrected her. Maybe you should have thought about that before making me the butt of your jokes. We didn't make you the butt of our jokes, Casper protested. We just, well, maybe we didn't express ourselves very well, but the point was valid. What point? Well, that you need our support in your old age, and we need your financial help now. It's a fair exchange. So even now, he didn't understand what the problem was. For him, family relationships really boiled down to financial exchange. An exchange implies equality between the parties, I explained. And you offered me the role of an obedient old woman who gives money and keeps her head down. Well, we got carried away, muttered Casper. Of course you're an equal member of the family. No, I said firmly. Equal family members don't demand money from each other. They support each other out of love, not out of calculation. Then support us out of love, exclaimed Evelyn. If money isn't important, then just help us. The logic was striking. They wanted me to prove the selflessness of my love by giving them money selflessly. Love must be mutual, I said, and I haven't seen your love for me. We have. Of course we have. Casper began to argue. We always invited you, welcomed you, talked to you. For money, I repeated. You admitted it yourself. The conversation reached an impasse. They couldn't understand that the problem wasn't the specific words spoken at dinner, but their general attitude toward me. To them, I wasn't a person, but a function, a source of money that needed to be kept in working order. Okay, Casper finally said in a completely different tone. If you want to play the offended party, go ahead, but in a week or two, you'll come to your senses and come back. Why do you think that? Because you have nowhere else to go, he explained with unpleasant certainty. You have no other loved ones. No one else will put up with you. Sooner or later, you'll realize that we're your only option. Maybe, I agreed, but loneliness is better than humiliating company. We'll see how you feel when you get sick or break your leg, Evelyn said maliciously. Then you'll remember how good it was to have a caring family. The threat was quite blunt. If I didn't pay, I couldn't count on their help in case of illness or misfortune. Thank you for your honesty, I said. Now I know exactly what to expect from you. Grandma, don't be stupid, Casper shouted angrily. You're ruining your relationship with your only family. I'm not ruining anything, I replied calmly. I'm just stopping paying for it. Then I hung up. The phone rang again immediately, but I didn't answer it. Let them shout into the void if they want to. They called several more times during the day, but I didn't answer. By evening, the calls had stopped. Apparently, they realized that I was serious. It was strange to realize that the relationship I thought was family turned out to be a business transaction. And as soon as I stopped fulfilling my part of the deal, The family immediately showed their true feelings toward me, but I didn't feel sad. On the contrary, I felt relieved. Finally, the masks had fallen, and I saw reality without embellishment. The following week brought a real siege. Casper and Evelyn used every tactic possible to try to get me to change my mind. They called several times a day, sent messages, even came to my house, but I didn't open the door. On Monday, Casper tried to play on my guilt. His voice messages were full of despair and reproach. Grandma, I haven't slept in 3 nights. Evelyn and I don't know what to do. You do realize that you are condemning us to disaster? We will lose the house we have been building for years. All our dreams will collapse because of your resentment. Do you really want to destroy the only family you have? He described his suffering in such detail, as if I were to blame for a world war. Sleepless nights, Evelyn's tears, ruined plans. All of this was presented as a consequence of my selfishness and callousness. On Tuesday, the tactic changed to threats. Evelyn left a message accusing me of cruelty and warning me of the consequences. Mildred, you're acting like a mean old woman. We've always treated you well, and you repay us with black ingratitude. But remember, you reap what you sow. When you are old and helpless, don't count on our help. It was funny to hear about good treatment from a woman who a week ago openly called me a burden. But even more amusing were the threats to leave me without help in my old age, as if I had to pay them now to earn the right to their mercy in the future. By Wednesday, they had moved on to more sophisticated methods. Casper started sending me photos of bank notices about overdue payments, red stamps, threatening texts, warnings about possible seizure of collateral. All of this was supposed to make me feel sorry for him and want to help immediately. See what your pride has led to? He wrote in his messages. The bank has already started foreclosure proceedings. A few more weeks and we'll be out on the street. How can you sleep peacefully knowing that your grandson will be homeless? I could sleep quite peacefully. In fact, for the first time in years, I slept without worrying about other people's financial problems. It wasn't up to me to decide how they would pay for a house they couldn't afford. On Thursday, they tried emotional blackmail. Evelyn recorded a long, tearful message about how they had dreamed of having children and how my actions were destroying their plans for a family. We wanted children so badly, Mildred. We planned to turn one of the bedrooms into a nursery. Casper had already picked out wallpaper with bears on it. And now everything has fallen apart. Our future children will be left without a home because of your selfishness. Don't you want to be a great-grandmother? The manipulation was so primitive that I even smiled. In 3 years of marriage, they had never once mentioned plans to have children. On the contrary, Evelyn often said that children would interfere with her career and personal freedom. But now, non-existent grandchildren had become a trump card for emotional blackmail. By Friday, the tone of the messages had become openly hostile. Casper no longer hid his anger and disappointment. You've shown your true colors, Grandma. It turns out that all your love was just for show. You didn't love me. You loved having power over us. You liked feeling needed at our expense. And as soon as we tried to become independent, you decided to punish us. The logic was twisted. According to him, they were trying to become independent by demanding more money from me and suggesting that I be put in a nursing home, and I, allegedly, was punishing them for their desire for independence. On Saturday morning, they came to my house. I saw from the window how their car parked at the gate, how they approached the door and started ringing the bell. The bell rang again and again, then they started knocking. Grandma, we know you're home, Casper shouted. Your car is here. Don't hide like a child. Come out and talk to us. I sat in the living room and calmly drank my coffee, ignoring the noise. Let them shout. Sooner or later, they'll get tired and leave. Mildred, Evelyn shouted. You're behaving disgracefully. We're your family. Can't you even listen to your own grandson? After half an hour, the shouting subsided. Apparently, they realized that I wasn't going to open the door, but they didn't leave right away. They sat in the car for another 20 minutes, apparently discussing their next move. Finally, the car drove away, and I was left in peace again, but not for long. That evening, the phone rang. This time, it was Casper's parents, my son Walter and daughter-in-law Priscilla. "Mom," Walter said in a concerned tone, "Casper told us about your argument. What's going on?" It was interesting to hear my son's version of events. Apparently, Casper had presented it as if I had suddenly and without reason stopped helping because of a petty grievance. "There was no argument," I replied calmly. "I just decided to stop paying for other people's expenses." "But why so abruptly? Casper says you had a wonderful evening, and then you suddenly left without saying a word." "A wonderful evening?" I asked. "That's an interesting interpretation. Did he tell you how they suggested putting me in a nursing home and discussed my imminent death as a source of inheritance?" There was a pause on the line. Apparently, these details were missing from his grandson's story. "Well, he mentioned that you were discussing plans for the future," Walter said uncertainly. "Maybe something was misunderstood." "Nothing was misunderstood," I replied firmly. "They made it clear that they consider me a burden and want to get the most money with the least amount of interaction." Priscilla came to the phone. Her voice sounded conciliatory but wary. "Mildred, dear, maybe we should discuss this calmly. Casper is very upset. They could really lose their home." "That's their problem," I replied. "Adults should be responsible for their financial obligations." "But you've been helping them for 3 years," Priscilla objected. "They've gotten used to counting on your support." "They've gotten used to taking my support for granted," I corrected. "There's a significant difference." "Mom," Walter interjected again, "I understand that you're upset, but think about family ties. Casper is your only grandson." They all played the same tune: family ties, only grandson, the need for forgiveness. But no one mentioned that family ties should be based on mutual respect. "Family ties work both ways," I said. "If Casper wants my support, he needs to learn to respect me." "He does respect you," Priscilla said quickly. "Young people just sometimes express themselves poorly." "He's 35, I reminded her, "old enough to be responsible for his words." "Mom, be realistic," Walter said more sternly. "You're a lonely old woman. Sooner or later, you're going to need help. Casper and Evelyn are your only support." Even my own son repeated the same mantra. "I am old, lonely, helpless, so I have to put up with any kind of treatment just so I don't end up completely alone. If that's the only support I have, then I'd rather do without it," I replied. "Don't be silly," Priscilla said angrily. "At your age, you can't burn bridges." "At any age, you can't let yourself be pushed around," I replied. The conversation with my son upset me more than all the previous calls. I was hoping for understanding, if not support, but Walter completely took his son's side without even trying to find out my point of view. Sunday began with a new offensive. This time, Casper and Evelyn brought out the heavy artillery. They brought a little girl of about 6 with them. Apparently, she was the daughter of friends or relatives. I watched from the window as they led the child to my door, explained something to her, and then the girl started ringing the bell. The manipulation was so cynical that it took my breath away. They were using someone else's child as a human shield for emotional blackmail. "Grandma Millie," a child's voice squeaked from behind the door. "Please open the door. Uncle Casper said you're very kind." I didn't open the door. After a few minutes, the child's crying subsided, apparently because they had taken her away. But my indignation at such behavior lingered for a long time. Dragging an innocent child into adult conflicts was the height of cynicism. On Monday, the tactics changed again. Now they were trying to pressure me through my sense of responsibility. Casper sent photos from work where he looked exhausted and depressed. I can't concentrate on work because of the stress, he wrote. My colleagues are already noticing my distraction. If this continues, I could be fired. Then we'll be left with no means of support at all. Do you really want to take things to such extremes? Now, I was not only responsible for the loss of our home, but also for the potential loss of his job. The logic was ironclad. If a person cannot work because of financial problems, then the person who does not solve those problems for them is to blame. On Tuesday, Evelyn tried a new approach. She wrote me a long letter full of remorse and promises. Dear Mildred, I understand that we behaved wrongly. We were selfish and ungrateful. Please forgive us. We are ready to change our attitude. We will see you more often, communicate more, and consult with you on important matters. You will become a full member of our family. The offer was tempting, but insincere. They promised to treat me better in exchange for resuming money transfers. It was the same bargain, only more veiled. By Wednesday, they seemed to have begun to realize the seriousness of the situation. The calls became less frequent, but more desperate. Casper no longer tried to persuade or threaten. He simply begged for mercy. Grandma, I'm begging you on my knees. Give us another chance. We'll change. We'll be different. Just don't leave us. The pleas were pathetic, but not sincere. He was willing to promise anything to get the financial support back. But as soon as the crisis was over, everything would return to the way it was before. By Thursday, it was clear that they had finally understood the hopelessness of the situation. The last call was short and angry. Okay, Grandma, Casper said in an icy tone. You win. We give up. We'll sell the house and look for something cheaper. I hope you're happy. I'm happy that you're finally becoming independent, I replied. Independent? He snorted. We're ruined. We've lost everything we've built over the years. But that doesn't matter to you. The main thing is that your pride is satisfied. My pride has nothing to do with it, I objected. It's about self-respect. Self-respect? He repeated contemptuously. You destroyed the family for the sake of self-respect? What priorities you have, Grandma? After that, the phone was hung up, and they never called again. The siege was over. I won this war, but the victory was bitter. Not because I felt sorry for them, but because my last illusions about family and closeness had finally been shattered. Nevertheless, I felt relieved. At last, I had the opportunity to live my own life rather than serving the needs of others under the guise of family duty. After the calls and visits stopped, a surprising silence descended on my life. For the first time in 3 years, I woke up without thinking about other people's financial problems or planning my next money transfer. Freedom from these worries was dizzying. The first thing I did was sign up for computer literacy courses at a more prestigious center and art history courses at a local college. I bought an annual theater pass and subscribed to interesting magazines. For the first time in years, I was spending money on things that brought me joy. I met some amazing people in my classes. Dorothy, a 72-year-old former nurse, was studying social media. Frank, a retired engineer in his 70s, was learning how to use software for designing birdhouses. No one called me grandma or hinted at age restrictions. A month later, I accidentally found out about Casper and Evelyn's fate from my neighbor, Mrs. Toretti. They sold their house and moved into a modest apartment. Evelyn got a job as a manicurist. The information did not make me sad or gloating. It was simply a statement of fact. At the theater, I befriended Rosalind, an elegant 68-year-old woman, a former editor. You have freedom, she said. You can do whatever you want without worrying about other people's expectations. In the fall, I enrolled in a digital photography course. I photographed nature, architecture, and my new friends. My home was filled with guests, people who valued my company, not my wallet. In December, I received a Christmas card from Casper and Evelyn. It was a regular store-bought card with standard wishes. No apologies, no attempts to restore our relationship. I put it on the mantelpiece and didn't think about it anymore. On New Year's Eve, I celebrated with my new friends at Rosalind's house. Raising a glass of champagne at midnight, I thought about how my life had changed. A year ago, I dreamed of a call from my grandson. Now I was surrounded by people who saw me as a person, not a function. At 70, I understood the main thing. Life does not end with the loss of loved ones or retirement. It becomes different, perhaps even more interesting, when freed from the expectations of others. My value was determined not by the amount of help I gave to ungrateful relatives, but by the quality of my character and my ability to form true friendships. I no longer had to buy anyone's love with money. And that was the best thing that had happened to me in recent years.